Hello, and welcome to another fully live Friday episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today, as usual, we have my friend and fellow hacker Alex on to talk about the news. So we had a pretty good stream on Wednesday where we got lots of excellent questions. So if we are doing the stream, if you're watching it live, by the way, hello Zam and everyone else on the stream, or if you're watching it on repeat and you have a question you want answered, make sure to drop it on the YouTube channel and we will make sure to get it answered on our Wednesday stream. Although we'll try to take some questions if we see them in the chat, but we do have a lot to cover today. So Alex, what have you been working on the last part of this week?
A whole ton of Nugget-related projects. So we've been doing a couple proof of concepts for the Hackbite episodes that we're doing, or rather the videos that we put out on Hack5. One of the most recent ones that we did was demonstrating, I think it was SSDP, which is Simple Service Discovery Protocol, which is basically a protocol that lets devices like identify themselves on a network and easily be discovered by someone that might want to configure it. So we created a proof of concept on the Wi-Fi nugget that allows you to replicate how an attacker could leverage this in order to prop up like a phishing page. So they could potentially make like an evil twin type attack by putting up a device that looks like maybe your smart home camera or like some other smart device that's connected to your network, and then use that in order to phish for credentials for the actual device that you might have connected. So I helped create a proof of concept for that, and then I also worked on another prototype for another video we did, which was for SCADA hacking. So I demonstrated how an attacker could potentially take over like an ICS, which is like an industrial control system or SCADA type system, and basically created a mock-up using a Wi-Fi nugget and a motor that was supposed to be a mock-up of like a centrifuge that could spin out of control. So those are a few of the projects I've been working on this week.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that the SSDP phishing thing, I saw a lot of other really cool examples where instead of pretending to be like a IoT camera or something like that, instead it pretended to be like a drive component or like a cloud component of some other service that you wanted to phish the user. So like Azure, or as you call it, Azure. Right. And a couple of these other like OneDrive and stuff like that, it can show up as like a OneDrive account or something, and then when you click on it, it asks you to sign in or confirm something. That all could just be part of a phishing attack. So really, really cool. We did that with microcontrollers, and kind of a lot of work to get it done, but you did it very quickly.
Yeah, the protocol is also like pretty simple, surprisingly.
Yeah, so if you want to try this out, you can check out the GitHub repository that will be in the video that's going, so hopefully, crossing our fingers, going live on Hack5 today. So if you want to see our video on a simple service discovery protocol hacking using microcontrollers, then check out Hack5 later today, because we're still reviewing the video, but we plan to post it a little bit later. Yeah, so pretty cool. So we are also going to be checking out some hackerspace stuff in the city of Spokane, Washington as well. So if you know anything cool to check out in Spokane, we're going to be checking out the library and some other cool hackerspace stuff around there. So yeah, let us know. We're taking it to another city. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm also going to check in on the chat and make sure that, yes, hello everyone. And hey. Zam says that it's not pronounced Azure, it's pronounced Azure.
Wait,
okay, got it.
Dang it, I thought he was like reaffirming my pronunciation. It's about to roast you for a second. Someone asks if we have any workshops coming up.
That's a really good question. So we are looking to do a big launch of the Rubber Nugget, which is the USB Rubber Ducky style attack platform using our Wi-Fi Nugget. And we're looking to launch that on Hack5 very soon. So as soon as we do that, we would be looking to probably do another online workshop. So that's going to be, anybody who buys a Nugget would be able to potentially get access to this workshop. And we just kind of want to get everyone together who does that. So we may be doing another online workshop as soon as we launch that, hopefully within the next like month or two, maybe 2 months, I'm saying. But in-person workshops are probably going to be a little bit out until the next conference we do. But yeah, so we'll see. All right, so getting started with the news today, we also like to go over interesting security tools and stuff like that. And one that I'll give a shout out to, I'm not going to go to the GitHub page, but Evil SSDP is, if you see our video on SSDP later today and you're like, that doesn't go far enough. I wish I had a Python program that could do the same thing, but way more. And I don't care that I have to use like a full computer in order to make that happen instead of a cheap little microcontroller. Well, Evil SSDP is a great thing to check out. It's kind of what we based some of our attack on. and it's an interesting Python program that can allow you to show up as a SSDP device. Okay, moving on from that, over on my screen, we have probably my favorite write-up that I'm halfway through. So I haven't completely finished this yet because I keep getting pulled around this week, but I really like doing spooky and weird things with packets on networks. I really like Wi-Fi stuff, and I really like network stuff. And a lot of my security researcher friends were sharing this. I really, really like this write-up. It's on how you can do interesting and weird things with multicast protocols. So this is over on GitHub. And as I said, I'm about halfway through it, and I've already learned some things I didn't know about networking that were really cool. So if you're interested in networking and doing spooky kind of stuff, I'm going to force Alex to read this later to see if we can implement some of these interesting things onto, for example, what our Nugget can do over Wi-Fi. So really, really cool write-up on multicast protocols and what kind of effects they can have on network devices and what kinds of interesting things you can do. As you can see, you can also do art. Wait, where is it?
I think you passed.
Yeah, no, I didn't.
No.
Here it is, spooky.
Nice.
Yeah, so I really, really like this. If you're interested in networking spooky stuff, then I would check out this write-up because that was my favorite thing I've read this week.
Nice. I actually got that repository recommended to me for some reason on GitHub, and I briefly scrolled through it. I didn't get to read through it either, but yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there.
Yeah, really cool stuff. So if you're, I don't know, I like to highlight other people's write-ups and tools and stuff at the beginning of this segment because frequently the community comes up with all kinds of great stuff, and this week that was my favorite. Okay, so moving on to news. So we talked a little bit about surveillance. Well, we persistently talked a little bit about surveillance on the show, but one thing that we haven't really covered is doorbells. So these video doorbells are frequently kind of ubiquitous in nicer neighborhoods. They will often be streaming that information back to a server, and in some cases, it's very easy for law enforcement to be aware that this footage exists and then request it and be able to get it without even necessarily interacting with the homeowner. So it kind of means that this is de facto surveillance that is very easy to access in some cases, and it might not be immediately clear to people who is going to be impacted by that. You think people going in and out of the door, but in fact, it turns out between 20 and 30 feet away, you can clearly hear conversations between people who might be in a car, who might be walking by on the sidewalk, on the phone or something. And that's a lot further than most people expected. And because of the way that this sort of data is being stored, it's really not clear then, whether or not it's legal to listen in on someone who's maybe in their own vehicle on the phone or something with the window partway down that a doorbell nearby happens to catch. It's just a little bit of something that you might not have considered when you're out and about. The fact that private security cameras might actually be recording your conversation and could be stitched together pretty easily just by going and getting the audio from these recordings that are progressively further and further down the street as maybe you walk down. It's just a new level of surveillance that, because of the private nature of it, is difficult to regulate because these are people that are voluntarily putting video doorbells up on their door, and also not very familiar because these are still pretty new. Not everybody has a video doorbell. Not everybody is aware of their sensitivity. So the fact that this could extend out in a bubble 30 feet away from each place that they're planted, and then there's maybe a whole bunch of them on a street, means that an entire residential neighborhood might actually be under surveillance that makes it really, really easy for that data to be pulled by law enforcement or anybody else who has access to it, such as the company hosting the servers. So a lot of these servers are also supposed to only be accessed under certain circumstances by the companies who are running them, like Amazon, for example. But in going through one of the stories on this, they were just kind of yeah, we have strong internal controls that says they're not supposed to do anything bad. But whether or not there's actually any restrictions on employees accessing these recordings is a big question, because it's not really clear whether or not, they're just told not to do anything bad and it's on an honor system, or if there's actually stringent internal controls. It kind of seems like not so much the latter. So somebody being able to, for weird, creepy personal reasons, go through and start surveilling somebody in a neighborhood. Let's say that, you have an ex who works at Amazon who's real crazy and somehow has access to these sorts of recordings. It would be conceivable that they could use their access or abuse their access to be able to surveil you in ways that really most people would not be aware was possible. So even getting access to your neighbor's doorbell camera and being able to listen to you talking on the phone or going in and out of your house, that might be something that most people aren't even aware is possible. So
the emergence of all these scary IoT connected things just seem like an untapped network of just devices that can be used to spy on people. That's pretty scary. I don't
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, because I used to work for a large company that has lots of personal data on many, many famous people and whatever else. And as part of that company, I got to see the internal way that a member of that company, I was a contractor, so I wasn't even a full employee. The way that somebody could log in, take a look at a problem, look at that person's history, and the fact that I could go and find out what a celebrity was up to. Was a little, I was like, really? There's not more protection. No, you just need to have a good reason. You might, if you access it and then something happens, they might come back and find out you accessed it and then need to, ask you why. So just make sure you have a good reason. I was like, what? So the fact that that could be kind of the same way that these companies work, it's just really not known, is disturbing to me, because having been part of a larger tech company that had access to that sort of data, they were pretty flippant about the way that they allowed contractors to access it. And they just warned you, you could get in trouble if you do this wrong, but there was no actual safeguards preventing me from accessing that data. It was just, logged so that in the future it could be audited, but that didn't really prevent any problems in real time.
Yeah. You also don't know what third parties they might be selling that data to, and if they're profiling faces with AI
or how they're processing it. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
If you are doing natural language processing, or if you're doing facial recognition or other processing on people's data that you're storing, you could be selling that data to someone else for a lot of money. Even if it's partially anonymized, that doesn't really mean much when all the data can kind of be pieced together afterwards.
Yeah.
All right, over to you. Hopefully it's less depressing.
Yeah, sort of in the same vein, I don't actually have the article pulled up, but there was a paper that I was reading about I guess you could call it an API, but there's a project called PrivID, or PrivID, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's PRIVID. But the idea is they are a service that basically contracts out, or rather, they sell your data, but in a way that's a little more palatable. So for scientists or researchers that are needing access to security cam footage or other large amounts of data that have facial profiles on them and stuff like that, they provide an API endpoint where you can request data about certain video footage and stuff like that, and they return certain parameters to you, but they also blur out the faces, so that way the people that are requesting this information get all the statistics they want, but it also anonymizes the identities of the faces that are in those videos. So I think that was an interesting model that they were trying to deploy with that. I didn't get to read too much into it, but maybe that's something I'll cover more in the future. But this one's also kind of tangentially related. There's an algorithm that's being implemented in order to prevent voices from, it prevents real-time voice recognition from being used maliciously. So this algorithm will essentially pick up what you're talking about, and it will obstruct. So basically what it does is it uses a predictive algorithm to determine what the next thing you're going to say is, and then it generates white noise to prevent any other audio sources that are listening in on you from being able to pick that up and log that data. So I thought that was pretty novel. But currently the only implementation of this that's able to work, of course, is for speech to text. Because if you're having a conversation with someone over Zoom, you would still need that full throughput with the speech going back and forth. But you can also see the efficacy of this algorithm and how it was able to fool speech recognition. So I thought that was interesting.
Wait, okay. I'm still slightly confused about it, because it sounds to me it just destroys the audio with white noise.
Kind of. So what it does is it uses a predictive algorithm to detect the next thing you're gonna say.
All right.
And then it just cuts the audio feed and also plays these whispers audibly over your speakers. So that way if there's any microphones or stuff nearby, it's able to just fool them by playing random noises. But it's supposed to be not obstructive to your conversation. It just plays really low whispers, which I think is kind of freaky.
That is kind of
ghastly.
freaky.
Yeah. So obviously if you're having a conversation in a virtual meeting or something like that, I don't think this necessarily would work, because it would just cut out your audio. But the demonstration that they showcased this for was just speech to text, which seemed to work fine.
All right, over on my screen, this is more Twitter rumor than I've seen substantiated fact, but there's a lot of OSINT focus going into the war in Ukraine and trying to find out where people are and how things are moving. And one unexpected source of intelligence, I mean, we talked about AirTags a while ago and how they could be used as trackers, but actually a lot of Apple devices, when they are away from their owners, can be tracked. This is something that's built into them, and they might continue to still work, but until they're like unenrolled from that user's account, their location, as best can be approximated, will still be available to the person who is the owner of that device. So if, for example, somebody happened to pick up some sweet Airpods that they happened to find just lying around the battlefield and then took them with them as they were moving around the country, it might actually be fairly easy to find out where that person's group of soldiers were just by pinging the location of the stolen Airpods. So using equipment that people might want to pick up and use that has secretive tracking abilities, in this case it's just the way that Apple tracks their products once they're enrolled with a certain user, is an interesting source of intelligence and could even be used to lure people into picking up devices that could then be used to track them later. That's why finding cool stuff can be a double-edged sword when it's able to be tracked, especially if artillery could be fired at you in revenge for stealing someone's AirPods. So yeah, if you don't want to get your unit shot at by artillery, you probably shouldn't pick up random devices that will continually ping their owners their current and exact location. Altogether, kind of like strange story of how different devices we see in our just headphones or something that just looks like an object. You charge it, you connect it to your phone, you use it, you don't think much about it. But if it's Apple branded, it could still be watching you if you are not the owner. In fact, it'll still be watching you even if you are the owner. It will just report back to you if you ask. So a very weird story. All right, and then switching things up, we have a critical chipset bug open on millions of Android devices, and what this basically is a really weird audio like codec that has a problem that could allow someone to completely control the audio processing, the media processing of someone's phone. Alex, were you covering this one as well?
Yeah, a little bit. I didn't get to read too much into it.
All right, tell me a little bit about it if you remember.
From what I recall, Apple has their own proprietary codec called ALAC, which is like Apple Lossless Audio Compression or something or another like that. But they have an open source version that was on GitHub that hasn't been updated for a while, and they also have the proprietary version that they still actively maintain. But the problem with the open source version is it was implemented in
2011.
Well, yeah, that too. Yeah. It's been implemented into other manufacturers' devices, which I think qualify Qualcomm and MediaTek. Yeah, and there were 3 vulnerabilities that were discovered in this codec. One of the most severe being a CVSS score of 9.8 that allows you to basically just send over an audio file that allows for arbitrary code execution, which is pretty nasty.
Yeah, and it looks like the kinds of things that you could potentially enable on this is streaming that person's camera. Being able to get access to their camera and stream that out is something that's entirely possible just by sending a malicious audio file, which would obviously be pretty concerning if you just got an audio, because most people don't consider an audio file to be an attack vector. But
unless it's a rickroll.
Unless it's a rickroll, exactly. But as we've seen with NSO Group, it's entirely possible to use some of these really obscure things. I mean, these are people who built a CPU and a GIF. So the fact that any sort of file can be used as an attack vector is a little bit concerning. And in this case, it's definitely something that you might be concerned about if you have an Android device that has one of these affected chipsets, because it looks like the standard has not been updated in a really long time. And the fact that this kind of legacy code almost is included in these 2 different chipsets is problematic because a lot of different Android devices do rely on them. So yikes. But the fact that potentially you could have a malicious website that plays this audio file is all kind of something that is problematic as we look at the way this could be abused.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be downloaded on the phone, I guess, so you could just have it being played. That makes sense. And that's terrifying.
All right. Okay, so moving over, actually, why don't we take one of yours?
Oh, sure. Speaking of NSO Group, there was a zero-click, I didn't get to read too much into this one, but there was another zero-click vulnerability that they discovered in the iOS messaging app. And they used this in order to target European Parliament members for quite a couple years, but this was just recently discovered. This attack has been dubbed as Homage, and there's not a lot of other information about this out there, but you can see that this was used in a campaign targeting at least 65 people using their spyware between 2017 to 2022, in addition to some of the other exploits that they've been known to use.
Yes, and many of you might have noticed we just temporarily engaged our cloaking device. Didn't mean to show you that, but we'll disclose more about that in the future. All right.
Wondering what was going on there.
Oh, wonderful. All right, so we also have, this is one of those, every time I get forced to read one of these stories about cryptocurrency, I just have to take a deep breath to like fully understand what happened here. So this is, and we covered this briefly, I think, last week. Beanstalk cryptocurrency project robbed after hacker votes to send themselves $182 million. Oh my God. Yeah, so this is, apparently the issue here is that the attacker was able to issue themselves a loan, which then immediately made them able to do a bunch of bad administrative things that caused them to be able to then drain them about, I don't remember how much money, a lot. But there was a flash loan involved. This is, I feel like we're doing something on cryptocurrency exchanges or like these other sorts of projects getting.
I just love
that was a really great quote. Nice. Yeah, just about every week. Oh yeah, and there it is again. Yeah. So
I think they walked away with like 80 million. They used like 100 million up front as like capital from the flash loan. So basically, I think the way I don't know anything about cryptocurrency, but from like the limited extent of knowledge I have, I'll try to explain this. So I think like a flash loan allows you to. Okay, so like without any capital, it allows you to initiate like a loan where like it just gives you a whole like crap ton of money, but by the end of the transaction, you have to also like pay back that money. So it's basically just like an uncollateralized loan that you have to pay back like within the same like block transaction. So basically, this hacker guy initiated one of these transactions, gave himself like $100 million, like that's how much he like allocated via the flash loan, but then he like immediately paid it back, but then used this loan in order to give himself like a large hold over this specific cryptocurrency network. So basically it gave him like a lot of votes in like how the network was able to do stuff with like funds and stuff like that.
Approve transactions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he got like 65% approval or whatever the heck. But yeah, basically he just like redirected a whole ton of funds towards himself, which came out to like $80 million via this flash loan.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He also donated like $250,000 to Ukraine, so I thought that was interesting.
Aw. Yeah, well, man, cryptocurrency projects. Sometimes some people say the only way to win is not to play. But in this case, it looks like they played and they lost. Again, like we saw a similar case of something weird like this happening about 2 weeks ago when someone else was able to get the majority voting rights in one of these distributed platforms that actually wasn't that distributed. And once the semi-centralized voting nodes were compromised to a sufficient point, they were able to basically sign off on whatever transactions they wanted. So finding loopholes in the way that these distributed finance applications are working seems to be very, very profitable nowadays. So yikes, and I'm going to continue to steer clear.
Of cryptocurrency?
Yes, all right, Alex.
Oh look, I actually had that same article pulled up. All right, let me close that. Okay, so circling back around to SCADA and ICS just for a little, there's just a lot of attention drawn around that, I guess, recently because of the whole like pipe dream thing, which was this toolkit that makes it easy for like beginners to otherwise be able to exploit like ICS systems. And I think like the biggest problem is that there's a lot of just convention that's used. Like for example, the OPC UA, which is a specific type of architecture that sort of denotes like how industrial control devices should interact with each other and exchange data and stuff like that. It makes it really easy for a toolkit to be able to target these devices since not only are these protocols ubiquitous, but they're very standardized. So once you have like an exploit that targets like one of these devices, there's going to be many that are affected. But yeah, so at a conference,
Pwn2Own.
Yeah, Pwn2Own
Miami. Yeah.
Yeah, at this conference, they awarded like $400,000 to various participants who were able to discover and I think also no, they weren't patched yet, but all this money was awarded to various participants who discovered zero-day exploits in these ICS systems. I think they discovered 26 zero-day exploits.
Yeah,
so it's just interesting to see like
there
how
were some
much
standout people there as well. Like what I thought was funny is like these two dudes won the top prize for they were Computer Sector 7 or whatever their group name was. But if you scroll down a little bit. Sometimes not that far.
Whoa.
Some of the groups were just like one person. Nice, I thought that was very bossy because like the number 2 group with 80 points instead of 90 points was just like one person as well.
Nice.
So the focus of this conference on like SCADA hacking stuff was really cool, and the fact that these people discovered some really scary bugs. Some of them were like they didn't have authentication in place, and you could just totally bypass it to issue certain commands. Some of it was being able to just like traverse directories you weren't supposed to be able to traverse and get access to things that basically gave the game away and gave you access to credentials and like API tokens and stuff. All this stuff was really interesting, and yeah, it was cool to. There's a video clip in the end of them winning, and they all looked so excited.
Oh yeah, I saw the dudes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there they are. So yeah, this looked like a lot of fun. Honestly, I wish I could have gone. I wish that this conference wasn't in Florida for like a lot of reasons. But yeah, most of which is that it's far. But yeah, it looked really cool, and the focus on SCADA hacking I thought was a really neat touch, and the fact they gave away so much money was also a great incentive. So yeah. Really cool event. Wish we could have been there, and congratulations to Computest 9. What was it?
Yeah, Computest 7.
Sorry, 7. I was right the first time. Wow.
Yeah, a lot's really at stake here though with ICS and SCADA now like super vulnerable, but it's pretty interesting.
All right, so switching over to my screen, Citizen Lab came out with another report on more victims of the sketchy Israeli spyware company NSO Group. So during the Catalan referendum to see whether or not they were going to be independent from Spain, there was a lot of pressure put on these like independence politicians, including apparently cyber attacks that were designed to give the government of Spain incredibly detailed knowledge in real time as to what they were doing. So key findings here were that at least 63 people were targeted or infected by the Pegasus malware, and 4 others with Kandaru, which is another very sketchy Israeli cybersecurity company that's actually just peddling malware, often targeted at politicians, dissidents, journalists, and other people who have powerful enemies. So these tools have become just kind of associated with being used by countries like Saudi Arabia and others against dissidents and people who, might cause some sort of problem for them, but aren't able to be really attacked using a legal framework. So this is kind of seen as a cyber weapon that gives rich people an advantage against opponents who are legally protected, but are still vulnerable to these sorts of cyber attacks. So fortunately, organizations like Citizen Lab are doing these investigations in order to expose when people are attacked by these incredibly sophisticated cyber weapons that have really no way of defending yourself against if you are targeted by them. And it's just another black mark for these companies that are repeatedly being caught being in the middle of geopolitical events, giving an advantage to people who, again, don't have the legal authority perhaps to do what they're doing, but have the money to try to get away with it. Not a huge fan of them.
No.
Yeah. All right, back over to you.
Cool. So a new malware variant based off Go is targeting DVR devices. So these are just control devices that are connected to like cameras and like CCTV devices and stuff like that. I do think it's interesting though that Go is appearing a lot just like as a platform for developing malware, because not only is it cross-platform, but also it's just super portable since you have the ability to do stuff like have precompiled binaries for like libraries and stuff like that. And Go also allows you to use like the same code base for whatever architecture or operating system you're deploying on without having to have like 3 separate versions for like Mac OS, Windows, and Linux and stuff like that. So it's just becoming a whole lot more popular for developing malware. So there's a new strain of the BotenaGo Malware, which is super stealthy and also is not detected at all by VirusTotal. So that's pretty bad. But this is targeting specifically these Lilin DVR devices using a 2-year-old critical remote code execution flaw. So that's just the first stage of the attack. It targets these devices specifically. But what's notable about this compared to the malware that it was based off of, which is BotenaGo, is it doesn't allow itself to enumerate and like scan for devices that might be vulnerable. It has to be like specifically targeted beforehand. So presumably the attackers that are going after these devices would have to have discovered them and then specifically aimed this malware to attack those devices. So after doing that, this is used in order to install, I think it's the Mirai botnet. Yeah, so they install the Mirai botnet and they download various payloads that allow them to execute arbitrary code on these compromised devices, which is pretty nasty. But according to Bleeping Computer, this isn't a huge threat since it's targeting specific devices and doesn't have the ability to propagate itself yet. Although they do note that this second stage has more potential to travel around whatever network that has been compromised via this attack.
Interesting that the malware is like deliberately limited.
Yeah.
Because most of it is just trying to grab whatever it can, and like if it happens to find an easier way in, then it's programmed, to try to do that. But the fact that it's like basically set to only go after specific devices is a kind of unusual characteristic.
Yeah, I think that's in part to also just avoid detection. So they got rid of like some of the other features of this malware that were known and already cached by VirusTotal.
All right, over on my screen, do you like data leaks? Do you like hacktivist data leaks? Well, there are a lot of hacktivist data leaks going on nowadays, but you won't probably see most of them on Twitter because Twitter's gone out of their way to specifically ban links to domains associated with some of these hacktivist groups, in particular, Distributed Denial of Secrets, one of my, I guess I'll say, favorite hacktivist groups in terms of just the volume of sketchy government data they've been turning over and being able to access and then leak onto the internet. So some of this data includes 817 gigabytes from the Russian agency that monitors and censors mass media, 79 gigabytes from the world's largest oil pipeline, which is state-controlled, 15 gigabytes from the State Nuclear Energy Agency and major exporter of uranium, and 2.4 gigabytes from a construction company. But I mean, this is really interesting stuff, and a lot of journalists like digging into this data because it gives them all the information they need for interesting stories, provided they're able to dig through it and find it. And what's interesting about this hacktivist group is they actually provide media training, and they help journalists go through these leaked troves of data, because sometimes this data can be a little intimidating to just begin to dive through. So really, really interesting group, but again, like you won't really be able to find any of these links on Twitter. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, it's just interesting to note that a lot of these data breaches are happening. They're just not able to even be shared on Twitter because Distributed Denial of Secrets is totally blocked there. So interesting stuff happening in terms of hacktivist data leaks, especially around Russian state companies. However, also being actively censored on Twitter in terms of being able to be shared. So interesting. Next up, have you tried to buy a Raspberry Pi recently? You might have noticed that the prices for the Raspberry Pi 4 have skyrocketed. I was on Twitter and I was on Amazon, and I posted this on Twitter, and I got some actually pretty good explanations from people as to why this was happening. But I noticed yesterday, the day before, a lot of people complaining about how difficult Raspberry Pis were to get. So I was like, what do you mean? And then I went on Amazon and I said, wow, it is currently crazy expensive to get certain types of Raspberry Pi 4s. So the best explanation I saw was Raspberry Pi 4B's 8 gigabytes are no longer in production for the time being. The entire production line is dedicated to 4B 2 gigabyte models for industrial and embedded controls. Only the Pi 400, which my feelings for are well known, 4 gigabyte is available for the consumer market. The last consumer 4B 8 gigabytes shipped last December.
Oh, dang.
But I mean, I've never really seen prices like this before for Raspberry Pi. You could buy a much bigger computer, a much bigger and nicer computer, for like $300. So the fact that these are currently just being, really, really overcharged, no matter where you look, is a big problem for people who need these for their projects. And a lot of different companies have implemented pretty serious restrictions around the number you can buy. I was seeing companies that sell these Raspberry Pis totally frustrated by bots coming through and buying everything and then turning around and scalping them for tons of money. So, and some of these were would be when I say bots, it might just be 100 people that have been paid off to do this as part of a human network, where it's actually profitable enough right now to turn around and sell a $35-$40 computer for $300-$400 to actually have all those people helping you buy 100 of them or however many come to the market. So there's been a lot of supply chain frustration around the Raspberry Pi right now, which is why I feel great that we have 6 of them.
Yeah. Scarcity is ridiculous, but it also makes me wonder if anyone's actually buying these at that price, because that's an
I imagine
price.
some people have to. If they really need something for a project, there's just not enough of a supply out there. And if you have something that calls for a Raspberry Pi, or if you're doing an educational, a class, for example, where you need a certain amount of them, and you've got the budget, I imagine people are paying that price for these right now.
It's crazy.
Yeah. So also the ESP32S3 has come out recently, and there's a couple boards by Unexpected Maker and Adafruit that take advantage of this new microcontroller. So we've talked previously about the choices we've made creating the Wi-Fi Nugget and which microcontrollers we've chosen to use because of all the advantages and disadvantages. But there was one thing that the board we opted to use in the Wi-Fi Nugget doesn't have, and that is Bluetooth. Well, I guess 2 things, and dual core, right? Am I correct?
The S2 actually does have dual core, which I discovered. It's weird because lots of the officially listed datasheets say that it's a single core chip, but what's appealing about the S line of microcontrollers is they actually do have dual core processing.
Interesting.
Which is really weird because I saw a lot of documentation saying it was single core until I actually needed to multi-thread.
Yeah, this one, the big thing they were advertising was it's much faster because it's truly multi-core. So I don't know
what that means.
You'll have to ask Adafruit. Because when they were introducing their new line of Feather S3 boards, they were saying that because it has, had brought back multi-core on the S3, it had Bluetooth, which is really cool because, theoretically you could be doing some hacking Wi-Fi stuff, some Wi-Fi phishing stuff, and then connect to the device over Bluetooth as well. So you could have an application on your phone where you're remotely controlling the microcontroller, and then the microcontroller is doing a bunch of Wi-Fi stuff, and you don't need to swap the Wi-Fi connection between providing an access point and a station and whatever to provide an interface. It is when you're using the Wi-Fi radio for both hosting a website and then providing a access point back to connect. It doesn't work well. It's very slow. It's clunky. You really can't use Wi-Fi to connect to and control the microcontroller and also do bad things at the same time. It doesn't work well. So having another way of connecting to it via Bluetooth, for example, is really, really cool. And having it be fast enough to be able to use a Bluetooth connection and a Wi-Fi connection at the same time is a huge advantage. So I'm really excited about the ESP32 S3, not C3, because that's different.
That one's garbage.
That's the one we don't like. But yeah, so we're starting to see boards that are made with this now. I actually haven't really seen it on AliExpress, so I had to pay a good amount of money in order to get a couple Adafruit boards. One of them an Unexpected Maker board and the other an Adafruit board to play with this. So if you're interested in microcontrollers for hacking, this is the one that we're really excited about because it has native USB, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and it's fast. So we'll let you know what we think. But so far, we are kind of giving a thumbs down to the C3 and a thumbs up to the S3. So we'll let you know if that stands up. And back over to you, I guess.
Sure. Just a brief piece of news from, oh my gosh.
QNAP again.
Yeah, QNAP yet again. Which really makes me discover if they just have good bug disclosure or if their product is bad. Who knows? But
we'll say good bug disclosure.
Yeah. QNAP is warning their customers to disable UPnP port forwarding on routers. So we actually just talked about this in relation to SSDP, which is a protocol that's based off UPnP. I actually forget what this stands for, but it's basically a protocol that just lets these devices be discoverable easily. But they're warning people who have their network attached storage devices to basically disable the UPnP port on their NAS devices, so that way attackers can't just openly discover this on the internet. Since this, of course, could potentially allow them to attack through malicious files that could infect your system and gain control. Because this, in combination with all the other vulnerabilities that were discovered on the NAS devices, might not necessarily be great. because they've been known to be problematic. I also think somewhere down here they list some of the vulnerabilities, but there were a whole bunch. They were vulnerable to like Log4j, they were vulnerable to like Dirty Pipe and some other pretty nasty ones.
No.
So,
oh my gosh. That's like a who's who of all the bad vulnerabilities that have come out in the last like 6 months.
Yeah, truly terrifying. So if you have a QNAP device, just yank it offline.
And one clarification from someone in the chat, they say that Distributed Denial Secrets is not a hacktivist group, they're a distribution group, kind of more akin to, oh god, what was that other one?
Like NB65?
No.
No, no.
Yeah, sorry, the one that used to leak a lot of documents that I'm now blocking on, but no, it's, so yeah, they are not accused of being the ones actually behind the hacks, are more the ones that are like hosting the data leaks and making them easily accessible. So thank you for the clarification on that. And then Adafruit is also, Zam was pointing out, requiring MFA in order to buy a Pi now, because they just don't trust people making like new accounts and then turning around and trying to do it.
I used to do that for the Pi Zeros.
Yeah, and then also Brian has noted that he is now rich because he has like 50 Raspberry Pi. So congratulations. At that price, you are now doing quite well. All right. So switching back to my screen, we can see that there's a lot more zero-day vulnerabilities that are being used and also detected. And there's a pretty big debate about what that means. Does it mean that there are more zero-day vulnerabilities that are in use, or does it mean that there is better detection? So there's kind of the same amount, but we're actually catching them faster and more. And it looks like, at least according to the kind of analysis by this article, that, yeah, it seems as though most of the time better detection is contributing to this. However, there are a lot of zero-day vulnerabilities, especially around mobile devices and browsers, that are increasingly becoming popular. So before we didn't see as many of these zero days that were targeting browsers and mobile applications, but now we can see that that is a huge focus. So it's interesting to note that these zero-day vulnerabilities, which previously were kind of exclusively the realm of governments that could afford to do all the research and development to stockpile these and weaponize them, are now also being developed by criminal organizations that are using them for ransomware or all sorts of other applications that make them money. So there's now a robust private market in exploitation and access, in which some of these exploit brokers will just buy up this research, turn it into weaponized exploits, and turn around and sell it to people who want to deliver ransomware or want to deliver malware or want to get access to a specific target, but don't know how, or don't have the tools to themselves, but have money ready to pay. So this whole private marketplace of zero-day vulnerabilities and the enablement of all this private money to go into basically the development of exploits that can be used for delivery of malware and ransomware, which is very profitable, that's kind of driven all of these zero-day vulnerabilities to be in use a lot more than they previously were. Because in the past, nation states would develop these and sit on them for long periods of time until they were discovered and then had to be patched and stuff, like we had with WannaCry. Eternal Blue, which turned into WannaCry. But here we have an instance of an active marketplace that uses these vulnerabilities all the time, that's incentivizing them being developed, sold, and actively used in ongoing malware attacks. So that's one of the big reasons why we're seeing so many zero days. But it's still really interesting to note that we're doing a much better job of detecting these and actually reacting to them than we have been in previous years. All right, back to you.
Ooh. So Lapsus is still making the rounds, even though apparently a whole bunch of affiliates were arrested in like Britain or wherever those children were. But T-Mobile confirms that they were hacked by the Lapsus $ extortion gang a few weeks ago using stolen credentials, which then in turn allowed them to gain access to their internal systems. So while they weren't able to necessarily do anything, they still were able to steal their proprietary, T-Mobile's proprietary source code, which is also sort of an interesting thing that Lapsus does. Basically what they do is they just like to steal source code from various organizations that they breach and use it to extort whatever it is they want from those groups. Like when they were targeting NVIDIA, they wanted them to like speed up drivers for their GPUs so they could do like crypto mining. But it seems to be that their model is to target the proprietary code of various companies and then use that to get their way with whatever their intents might be. So they tried to do the same thing to T-Mobile, but they quickly shut this down. And they claim that their systems and processes worked as designed, and they were able to shut down the intrusion, and that they also got rid of the old credentials that were compromised. Yeah, so that's basically all we have for that T-Mobile breach. But also you can see some other breaches against T-Mobile in the past several years, which seem pretty nasty.
All right.
So not a good look.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I remember that they attempted to pay off the hackers to not breach their data, and that did not work so well.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so over on my screen, some good news for anybody who's still anxious about the pipe dream malware that is a toolchain developed to attack SCADA and ICS devices. $12 million is being given to a variety of different universities in order to develop defenses against this. So detection, mitigation, and basically to make sure we have some ways of being able to have a free set of tools to actually stop these sorts of attacks before they start affecting things that can potentially impact the entire country. So if you are on a team at the University of Florida International University, Iowa State University, New York University, Texas A&M Engineering Experimental Station. Wow. Okay. I didn't know you could apply to that. University of Illinois at Chicago, and Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. These are all receiving some portion of that $12 million to help defend against industrial hacking and develop ways of mitigating it. So really good news that we are investing in education around this, and that some of these universities are being retained to basically try to stop these attacks before they become a widespread problem. And my friend Nick is going to be pretty mad that there's no California universities on here at all. None in LA, none anywhere. Dang. Not at all. Wow. Seems a little, okay, that's fine. Nick, I'll let Nick be mad about that. All right, so traditionally, on this news story, traditionally agriculture has been a very sensitive topic when it comes to ransomware attacks. The US government really doesn't like it when you go after critical stuff. And in this case, food security is definitely something that's extremely critical and is getting a lot of government attention. So while the agricultural industry hasn't been a large target of malware attacks in the past, there have been incidents that are causing the FBI to be worried that this is going to be increasingly common and could impact the food supply or other sorts of parts of the agriculture industry. So a quick history of some different attacks against the agricultural industry. A multi-state grain company suffered a Lockbit 2.0 ransomware attack, and that stopped grain processing, but also they provide seed, fertilizer, and logistics services, which obviously has a pretty big impact during planting season and could potentially affect the ability of farmers to grow in an entire region. In February 2022, a company providing feed milling and other agricultural services had two instances where an unauthorized actor gained access to their systems and attempted, but didn't succeed, to initiate a ransomware attack. Now, fortunately, this was stopped, but obviously it could have been a lot worse. And between September 15th and the 6th of October, 6 grain cooperatives experienced malware attacks that had a mix of different programs involved and made it incredibly difficult to actually remove this stuff because they had been targeted by Conti, Black Matter, Suncrypt, I don't even know how to pronounce this one, and Blackbyte. All of these, which sound terrible. So some had to completely halt production, whereas some other ones just had administrative functions knocked out. But either way, this was a big impact for those companies. And in 2021, a business management software company was attacked. And while they weren't directly involved in agriculture, a lot of their customers were. So after the attack, some of their customers had secondary ransomware infections, which were several agriculture cooperatives that ended up being impacted by that. So in the case of the last attack, the agricultural cooperatives weren't even the intended target. It was a software company that was hit, but because the attack spread and caused secondary infections, it caused the agricultural industry to be impacted by it. So traditionally, as I said, malware actors have kind of steered away from targeting agriculture because it is a very sensitive subject. It's the food supply of a country that could potentially be impacted, and that will definitely bring down government attention on you. But seeing these sorts of attacks increase, or again, just being impacted by another attack that's going after a company that isn't tied to agricultural, makes it increasingly likely that one of these attacks will impact the food supply, as all these companies are critical and work together in order to make sure that some of these really sensitive and particularly time-sensitive things happen when they're supposed to, especially like spring planting, for example. All right, so we talked about the Okta issue. a couple of weeks ago, and the problem was that Okta was like, no, everything's fine, there's no big deal, and then Lapsus was like, hey, here's a screenshot of me having access to the internal management portal. Does that seem fine? So Okta has apologized for not initially disclosing this breach or really being super clear about what happened, but now they're saying that for a very short window of time, 25 consecutive minutes, the threat actor only compromised, I think it was 2 customers. So they're kind of saying that not that much really happened here, even though they are very sorry that they didn't tell you about this before. But obviously a lot of companies rely on Okta. It is quite an upsetting news story to go out there, and I imagine they are kind of in damage control, trying to figure out what the next step is here. But because you have this very provocative threat actor making claims in a very public place, posting screenshots, the company's in a really difficult place now because the threat actor is deliberately, obviously, for their own purposes, trying to make the breach seem much worse than it really is, and the company now seemed to kind of try to do damage control by downplaying it at first, and now is in the tough position of having to take a step back and maybe disclose more information they didn't disclose before, or maybe even change some of the details they'd initially presented. So
It's kind of hard to walk back.
yeah, it is,
already
which
out
is why
there.
these are always such tricky incidents. And yeah, it's difficult to be in the middle of a back and forth with the threat actor who's financially motivated to make the attack look as bad as possible to get you to comply with whatever their demands are. So, okay, security is hard enough without false positives. But in this case, a lot of people running Windows Defender were being hit with this very, very scary seeming warning. Multi-stage incident involving execution and defense evasion, said Windows Defender for endpoints being monitored. And Microsoft 365 Defender was issuing these reports after people were just trying to update their Chrome. So obviously this caused lots of alarm. People were posting about it. Nobody was sure what was going on. But in the end, Microsoft posted, admins may receive a false positive alert for Google update on Microsoft Defender for endpoint monitored devices. So a lot of system administrators were probably very confused and scared for a while. But in the end, it was just a matter of false positives. So eventually they were able to roll this back and get things up and running again. But there was a period of time where they're just saying, hey, if you get this alert, just ignore it, which obviously is the perfect opportunity for malware actors to quickly switch their attack vector to look something similar. So obviously it's not a great look to be telling people to ignore that false positive in real time, but sometimes it's really the best you can do. And in this case, it looks like it's been fixed, but still kind of an alarming and spooky way to get a notice. And the last piece for me this week is I guess in the Olympics of black hat hacking, it looks like the Chinese are winning when it comes to the sheer use of zero-day vulnerabilities. Now, of course, zero-day vulnerabilities are increasing in use all the time, but the Chinese Hafnium group used a lot of them, relatively, in order to do a lot of monitoring and espionage-based activities on Microsoft Exchange in order to monitor the communications of governments and such abroad. Overall, it looks like in second place was Russia, which used 2 zero-day vulnerabilities, and finally North Korea with 1. And China had, I believe, 8 zero-day vulnerabilities used total, and 2 zero-day vulnerabilities were burned just in that one campaign to try to monitor Exchange servers. So that's a lot. And as we discussed before, zero-day vulnerabilities are expensive to develop into weaponized exploits, and as soon as they're blown, they get patched really quickly. So in order to have unobstructed access to, maybe Exchange servers or something like that, you would have to develop this exploit, try to keep it secret for as long as possible, and then when it finally becomes public, just accept the fact you've lost a very valuable tool that is now substantially less valuable and less potent. So burning vulnerabilities is crazy, especially when they're 0 days, but it looks like these groups are increasingly willing to do it in order to get an advantage.
You kind of have to make the most out of it when it's just a one-shot thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah. All right, back over to you.
Just the last piece I have for today. GitHub says that some organizations were breached using stolen OAuth access tokens. So specifically, the 2 companies that were breached were Travis CL and also Heroku. So basically, OAuth tokens are just tokens that are given out to authorize different pieces of software that you might be working with in order to upload your code to GitHub. But these OAuth tokens were apparently breached or discovered by an attacker, and they were able to use this in order to download private information from Heroku and also Travis, which is not good, but that's about as far as I know on that. But yeah, that's not great.
Also, Zam points out in the chat that by holding onto zero-day vulnerabilities, you also increase the risk of somebody else disclosing them. As was debatably the case during the Eternal Blue thing, it looked as though there had been some sort of agreement between like the NSA and Microsoft where if they found something really bad, that being the NSA, they were supposed to tell Microsoft so they could develop a patch and then prevent some sort of disaster from happening if an adversary, just leaked this tool. Whoops. Well, they forgot to share that, and then it was basically that exact scenario that happened. This tool was leaked. It was still completely able to be exploited. Microsoft had no time at all to develop the patch for it, and we had the Eternal Blue / WannaCry thing happen. So yeah, there's definitely some problems there with hoarding zero-day vulnerabilities. So maybe it is good that these countries are just immediately using them rather than stockpiling them as they used to be. All right, so that is all the time we have for this week. I want to thank, of course, Zam and everybody else in the chat for hanging out with us today and talking about the security news, and also for some of the corrections, like on the distributed denial of secrets, hacktivist group versus distribution group. It's always good to have other people in the chat keeping us honest and hanging out with us. So, Alex, thanks for joining us this week. If you want to join us for our next Q&A session, you can either leave a question on the YouTube video and we will answer it live on Wednesday, where we hopefully will have a special guest, which I cannot announce yet. But if you if you join us either on the Security Forward channel or on the Hack5 channel on Wednesday, you can find out who that is. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.